I do.
Perfect. I think we're recording. Welcome, Tally. I appreciate you joining me for a conversation.
Hey, Ben. Good to be here.
So those of you guys don't know me, my name is Ben Fellows. I run Whoop Software. I'm joined today by Tally Barak. I hope I pronounced that properly. Thank you. And she is I just had your LinkedIn pulled up. She is a software architect at YOOBIC. You are a Playwright ambassador. You are the maintainer of the Playwright Cucumber open source project, and all-around Slack contributor, but now Discord contributor. Anything else that I miss about your background that you want to call out?
Just to say that I've been around software for quite a while now, over 30 years. So I've seen quite a lot of changes in this world. So, yeah, part of my background.
So today's conversation, I want to talk to you about Cucumber and BDD and Playwright. For those of you people that aren't maybe as familiar with BDD and Cucumber, do you mind just giving your perspective on the definitions and kind of what they mean in relation to QA and Playwright specifically?
Well, BDD stands for Business Driven Development, and it basically means writing your requirements in a specific language that can then be automated in a very structured way. The syntax is called Gherkin, a common one. It's not the only one, but that's a very popular framework for BDD. And on top of that, we have Cucumber that knows how to execute and run tests based on this Gherkin syntax.
Awesome.
And yeah, we are using it.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, we are using it.
And you,
YOOBIC.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, you're fine. Sorry, I don't know if there's a delay potentially, so apologies too. You were saying you were using it at YOOBIC.
Yes, that's right. We have made a decision a while ago, I think about 5 years ago, to write our tests, end-to-end tests, using Gherkin and BDD. And we basically, not all of our automation, because we also have unit tests and now we have component tests, but our end-to-end tests are actually written in Gherkin, which allows us to better communicate in the organization, because this is not code. This is English. You can use other languages, but it's mostly English. So people that have less technical background, like product managers and even some, and also the manual QA, they can actually go through the script and understand exactly what the system does and what is being tested. While if you put in front of them code, a pure code, it's harder. I mean, as developers, for us, it might seem natural to read the function and look at the parameters, but people that are less trained in this kind of practice, they actually will have quite hard time to understand, oh, this is how you map the parameters and so on. And when you write in Gherkin, a sentence will just be, user opens the lessons screen or something. User goes to lessons page or something like that. And and anyone can read that. And in fact, the tests are very similar to what you do in manual testing. When you write test steps and you tell the person what to do, you would not write a function and say, go to, and then put a URL. You would say, you would say go to and the URL, but it will look like a sentence and not as a parameter.
Yep. And so you did, oh, wild. I really think there's a delay here, Tally. This is my fault entirely.
Yeah.
Well, people I hope can deal with it. So you've been doing this for 5 years. Playwright's been only out the last couple of years. I'm assuming you've then transitioned some level of this into the Playwright world. Can you talk to me about before Playwright how you were introduced to Playwright, how you've then implemented this with Playwright?
Yeah, sure. Gherkin is a syntax. The tool that is actually running the test is called Cucumber. Specifically, we are a JavaScript a workshop, so everything is in JavaScript, Node at the back end mostly, and front end, which has Angular. And so we took Cucumber.js as the framework that run the test, but initially we worked with WebDriver.io. So the way to look at it is it actually has two sides. One side is the test execution, and the other side is the browser automation. Okay, and they work together obviously, but these are two separate concerns. And we worked with Cucumber. We worked with WebDriver.io, which was implementing Cucumber inside it, and this was our initial setup. From that, and then the browser automation would be the WebDriver automation, which is some sort of a wrapper around Selenium mostly. And so we had all our tests in Gherkin within WebDriver.io. And we actually had a serious issue. We were working with web components very early on. And we used Shadow DOM. And this was a real pain, tragic. We are working with Stencil.js from the Ionic team. And this was a real pain, because the Selenium did not, and still does not, mostly, does not support working with Shadow DOM, which means parts of your DOM are completely hidden from the testing, from the browser automation framework. And we were looking for solutions again and again, writing our own things, using different things. At some point, we even disabled the Shadow DOM inside the browser in order to run the tests. We were that desperate. So I just got into the habit of going on the web once every fortnight or monthly, and search for something that supports Shadow DOM, browser automation that supports Shadow DOM. And in one of those searches, just Playwright came up, and I said, okay, it looks new. I think it was 1.2 or something, like very small number. It was not the 0 dot, but it was very early on. And I looked at the documentation, and they were just saying, yeah, by the way, we support Shadow DOM. It's not even an issue. And I went like, what? Everyone is suffering, and for you it's just no biggie. So I took it for a run, and I was just shocked. It just worked. That simple, just worked. It saw all of our DOM. It found all the elements. We didn't have to use the horrible XPath going up and down. It was far from what it is today, but it still was it was working very, very well. So quite fast we did the transition, and luckily, because we were still had the Gherkin, we basically had all our tests already written. We didn't have to rewrite the test. We did some refactoring, I will not lie, it was not as just like, rewrite the steps and everything, but it was a lot less than like rewriting everything. So we just basically used Cucumber.js as the automation, the test framework, and replaced WebDriver.io with Playwright to run the test. And by the way, just a note, for people that know Playwright today, Playwright has the Playwright library, which is a browser automation, and it has Playwright Test, which is a test runner. When I did this step, other than the fact that we already have the test, there was no Playwright test. They did not have a test runner yet. They were relying on Jest, basically, to run to be the test runner, and only had the browser automation. I really liked it, and I mean, that's why I'm a Playwright ambassador. Just because I got into it, I was really amazed. I was working with a team. I helped on some issues even early on. We had I gave a lot of feedback, initial feedback. Bear in mind, at the time the community was really small, so we didn't have like thousands of issues and requests. It was quite few people. And and later on I also started helping people. It was then it was on Slack. And at some point I realized that all the work that I did for us on the integration with Cucumber, I should extract. The repository is not exactly what we do, because we have a bit more complex setup, but a lot of the things that I learned how to do for our project, I extracted them into this repository, Playwright Cucumber, and I just posted it as an open source, so anyone who wants to start with it doesn't have to learn all the things that I had to learn. They just have a starter. I mean, I know how useful a starter project can be. I didn't have a starter project for Playwright Cucumber, so that's my contribution, to make sure that other people can go faster. And it's not extremely popular, but I do see forks and I do get feedback on it, so I know that people are using it. But I have to say something. As much as I like the recognition that comes with the repo, I would be extremely happy on the day that Playwright will have the Gherkin syntax, ABDD syntax built in, and by repo will become obsolete. So I'm happy to contribute, but the end goal for me is that it will become obsolete.
I do think that we all have our little things. Like mine is merge reports from sharding. Like the day that we can natively, like in Playwright, merge the reports after sharding them, I'm like, okay, that's the day. That's such a cool journey. And so when you look at the journey of Playwright, is your repo still primarily using the Playwright API, or have you tried to use Playwright Test at all? Because I think that is one of the bigger unknown pieces that people don't recognize about Playwright, is there's really two distinct things here, and they both have their own tool sets and advantages. Could you get into a little bit more of explaining the advantage of using the Playwright API, or what are your thoughts on the current sort of state of Playwright Test versus the Playwright API?
So first of all, they work together. I mean, the Playwright library is the automation, and we fully use it. We don't replace anything. And I think, by the way, they did a great separation, maybe because of the history and the way it evolved. But for most of the things, it is well separated. You can see that also in the documentation. So the Playwright library we use to its fullest, like all the API that exist there. Playwright tests as a test runner overrides with what Cucumber.js does. So sadly, as much as people ask, how do I do that in that exists in Playwright test, how do I do that with Playwright Cucumber? So sadly, in most cases, it doesn't work the same way. But I have to say at the same time that a lot of things also exist in the Cucumber.js world. For example, if you look at running tests in parallel, Playwright tests can run in parallel, but also Cucumber.js as the parallel. It has the retries. So a lot of the functionality, I will not say all the functionality, but a lot of the functionality exists in Cucumber.js. You just have to be aware, maybe go to the Cucumber.js documentation and find it out. Again, there are some things that are lacking inside Cucumber.js, and this is why I really love Playwright Test. We use it we use it, by the way, for the UI components testing, but not for the end-to-end test. I love it. I think it's fantastic. I can even say that if it was there on the day I started, as much as I see the value in using BDD, I might have switched and write also our end-to-end test with Playwright Test. But I don't know. It's one of the things that occasionally I think about. Should I move? Should we not move? So far, I have to say that I didn't see anything that is so powerful that would worth the move. So we are still with the Cucumber on this one. The only thing is probably sharding, but sharding is, to be honest, is pretty easy to implement on CI. I mean, it's just 3 or 4 lines of bash code and you get it. Of course, it's nicer if someone else is doing all the thinking for you and you don't have to worry and just say shard equal. But it was not that complex to implement it ourselves. And again, it's great. It's beautiful. By the way, we also work with, we also have VS Code debugging. It doesn't work exactly as the Playwright Test does, but you can run the tests, you can debug them, and again, a lot of the things from the automation itself, like traces, we can use them. We also have the traces. We just need to put it inside our report, and it's not coming, built in as it does with Playwright. But it's, again, Playwright Test is amazing.
So ideal world then is Playwright ultimately supports BDD, Gherkin, and some version of that. That's kind of the ideal circumstance. For those of the people who are kind of making the decision today and they want to learn more about Cucumber, Cucumber has a ton of documentation and a great community. And then I would encourage them to start with your repo. But is there anything else that comes to mind for just advice of somebody trying to make the decision of what works for them and how to get started if they're kind of looking at the Playwright ecosystem today and making some of those decisions?
Well, the first decision is probably what is your what is the language you use. Cucumber, both Cucumber and Playwright have different languages that they support. I don't remember the exact list. I'm not even sure the lists completely overlap, but definitely things like Python are supported in both. JavaScript, TypeScript, obviously.
Yep.
I think also the .NET C# environment is supported in both, but again, go to the documentation and you probably know better. Again, Cucumber and its documentation, and Playwright also has fantastic documentation. I have one video. I know that some other people also did some videos on Cucumber and Playwright, if that's interested. Probably it's slightly different because, I mean, there might be different ways to combine the two. Yeah, I don't know. Google. That's always
Google. It is.
Google.
That is.
Or
yeah, Google it. Or ChatGPT in today's world. Except for ChatGPT still is stuck on Playwright. Actually, that is a word of advice I'll say is ChatGPT doesn't know that, I think, as far as I've understood it, Playwright test isn't really a thing in ChatGPT. So it doesn't really, because it was trained in like 2019, 2020. So there's a lot of Playwright that ChatGPT, 2021. There's a lot, I'm trying to remember. And by the way, is your role an ambassador? It's an interesting thing. It's I call it like active learning. It's nice to be able to kind of engage back and forth, but you just have to assume that like a handful of what it tells you is wrong and double check it in other places. It's interesting. Like if you go into it knowing that something it tells you is wrong and that you're just like using it as a starting point, like it's a good resource in that sense. You've had the pleasure of watching the Playwright project grow from like very early on to like what it is today. As an ambassador for Playwright, like how would you say, where do you see Playwright going, like in the sort of QA? This is a bit of an esoteric question, but where do you see Playwright going against Cypress or against some of these other ones? Do you feel like Playwright's on a trajectory to where it really is going to be one of the premier test automation frameworks for the next 4 to 5 years?
I would be really surprised if it doesn't, because it's definitely the best tool right now in the market, I think. I mean, I don't know if people are aware of the story, but the Playwright team is actually the team that was in Google and developed Puppeteer as a browser automation, as an out-of-process browser automation, in fact. And this is like the new thing, if you compare it to the old browser automations like Selenium and such. Or Karma or whatever. So I don't know exactly what happened there behind the scenes, but they took this knowledge and they have an amazing amount of knowledge about how browsers work, and they like brought everything over to Playwright. But while Puppeteer was mostly focused on automation per se, with Playwright they were focusing on testing. And it turns out that they have a lot of similarities, but it's not exactly the same. So things like the auto waits, which is one of the amazing features of Playwright, which was there from day one, by the way. Well, not day one, but from version 1 definitely. And that was a huge thing. I think Cypress had it first, by the way, to be fair about it, but they also implemented it, and they just make your test much more stable versus other tools. So they just brought all this knowledge over and created a great tool. And yeah, I see now how the community grows. If 2 years ago I was the only one saying, yeah, use Playwright, and people say, use what? Is it Playwright or Playwright? I'm not sure if my accent is good enough to tell the difference, but like, what is it? Have you heard about it? No. Like in conferences, people, I would say Playwright, and people go like, no, never heard about it. I think this is now less and less. A lot of people know about it, or at least heard about it, and I think it's on a great track to be the best, the leading tool in the coming 2, 3, 4 years, maybe even more. It's definitely there. It's I mean, just like yourself and other people, you just start working on it and you go like, oh my God, I didn't know that browser automation can be that simple and that enjoyable.
Yeah, it's we've had conversations in the past about my experience with Playwright, where I got into it only about 8 or 9 months ago, so I'm still technically a newbie, but my experience was everything that ultimately I would get stuck on in other frameworks, the deeper I dug with Playwright, the more I was just like, oh my God, it does this. Oh my God, it does this. And there was just never a moment where I was just like, oh, here's the catch. And I kept waiting for the catch. I kept waiting to sort of for the it's too good to be true moment. And I really haven't had it outside of some very minor kind of workaround things that are really not a big deal at all. I want to take the last 2 to 3 minutes and talk a little bit about somewhat of a different subject, but it is really interesting, so I just wanted to get it as part of this conversation, which is, you had said at the beginning of this conversation, one of the biggest things that I think isn't spoken about in QA, as you pointed out, is data management, and just work that into this conversation in the last 2 to 3 minutes and briefly touch on data management and why it should be more of a topic in the QA community. Do you mind just sharing your thoughts on the overall topic?
Yeah, sure. We have quickly discussed it. Well, it's a big topic, and
it's not one for 2 minutes. That is true.
Yeah, that's my point. No, I think the key here is isolation, but more than that, I think people don't really talk enough, and you cannot really find resources. I was looking into resources, how to properly manage data in end-to-end test. And when you have a conversation, a lot of times people will just fall back to saying, oh, no, I mock the API and that's it. Well, mocking the API is a great practice, but it means you're not doing end-to-end test if you're not testing your server. So absolutely, by all means, do mock your API, but don't mock yourself that you're doing end-to-end tests. And managing the data is hard. It's hard because you need to set up the data. Tests can fail. If tests fail, they might leave leftovers in the data. So, for example, you just inserted a product, okay, as part of your test, and the test failed, and even if at the end of the test you delete the product, if the test failed, the product is there, and now the next time you run the test, it will fail because of the last failure. And the same way goes for, you need to separate the data. If you want to run, we were talking about running tests in parallel. If you want to run tests in parallel, you cannot assume that one test is doing one thing and one test is creating the product and then another test is deleting it, because the deleting might run before the create. So you need to have a completely separated and isolated environment. And there are ways to do that, which is mostly about randomizing some of the data. So instead of inserting a product which is, a television, you will insert a product which is TV and some UUID, GF334A, in every test. And every test should be aware that this is the product I inserted, and now it doesn't collapse with other tests. So if anyone, I'm saying for 2 years now that I will write a nice article on Medium and explain all the complexities and why you should not wipe the database, or maybe work with a centralized database or local database and so on. I'll probably say that for another 2 or 3 years, and maybe then I will write it, or who knows? Maybe I will. It's just like every time I get to it, it's my head is spinning from everything I need to write, and mostly at the end I think like, maybe I'm doing this completely wrong. Maybe someone has the correct answer, but I didn't see it yet. So if you have some magic, go ahead, tell us.
It's data management seems to be something where there's no one size fits all strategy. It's about implementing a lot of different strategies in one suite in kind of a run, because they all serve different things. But I think there is no sort of source of truth, at least as far as I found too, and I would actually encourage anybody listening to this at this point to please point us in that direction, because there's amazing pieces, but that kind of end all be all. So our goal is always to keep it under 30 minutes. Tally, I could keep talking to you for another hour because I find your background absolutely fascinating and your insights absolutely fascinating, but I do want to cut it off for this time, but I'd love to chat again with you in the future. Tally, any last things you wanted to share with folks in the last minute or two while we have you here?
Well, I assume that people that are watching this already tried Playwright, but if you didn't, go ahead, give it a try, because you might even enjoy using it. So go ahead.
Awesome, Tally. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ben. It was a pleasure.
All right.